Good afternoon. Whoa. It is absolutely my extraordinary pleasure today to introduce you to Eric Dishman, your keynote speaker this afternoon. I'm going to read just one line, and then I just want to talk from my heart. I want to get his title right because he has so many. But most notably, Eric holds a very prestigious position as an Intel Fellow. Very few people in the world achieve that. And he is the general manager of the Intel Health and Life Sciences Group. Eric has been at Intel for many, many years, and he's accomplished many, many things. He's known worldwide for his advocacy for patients and also for aging in place. More recently, his advocacy has really expanded into personalized medicine and genomics. What you may not know about Eric, though, is he's a passionate innovator, brilliant innovator, from working on it from the very beginning in early days with Paul Allen to now. And the guy innovates to scale, right? He comes to places like this and rocks people's worlds. He works with people on individual levels. He talks with countries and global leaders. There's no limit to how he innovates and how he's done it and the impact he's already had. So I think you're in for an extraordinary treat, and I'm passionate about the fact that when you're done today listening to this brilliant man, go out and Google his TED Talk. Go find the other videos on Eric that are out there on the internet. It will blow your mind. Go to curiosity.com. There's so much going on here that you can't fit into a 45-minute presentation, and you owe it to yourself to expose yourself to this. But most importantly, I think I want to just describe Eric on a personal level. I always try to say something about a person that maybe other people don't know. And don't worry, I'm not going to air your dirty laundry, Eric. But for those of you that don't know this about Eric, he loves mountains. If he can find a mountain anywhere in the world, particularly one with snow, this is where you'll find him. And he loves to climb them, ski them, be in them. This is his favorite place to be. And I really believe now that makes so much sense, because what Eric really does in life is climb mountains. He finds new vistas, and he has this incredible gift to bring all kinds of people along with him to see the vista. And if they can't get there, he'll come down from the mountain and explain the vista to you and take you on a journey through his experience. That's one of his greatest gifts. So without any further delay, here's Eric Dishman.
I'm going to talk about inventing the end of long-term care. It's not nearly as dire as it sounds. And, you know, it's not that I have a problem with long-term care. Actually, I love long-term care. I just want what you do in long-term care to become care. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to share with you some of the work that we're actually doing in China, as China tries to figure out how they invent long-term care, because they don't really have it. And I'm going to sort of share with you some of our current thinking about the sort of paradigm of where healthcare is going, which we call personal health. So hopefully I can pull all these things together, but you never know. And Scott, your job is to tell me to shut up 5 minutes. Give me a 5-minute warning when you want me to shut up. First of all, who am I? That's me. I hate this picture. I can't believe I'm sharing it, but it's like my forehead looks like large enough where you could project my slides up on the top of my forehead. So my parents really made me this way. Well, you know that. You understand biology, so that's not what I mean. What I mean to say is my parents made me into an entrepreneurial patient. I was actually born without hip sockets. Most people don't know this. And I was never supposed to be able to walk. And my parents were told by the doctors, he'll never be able to walk. And they took things into their own hands and said, we don't believe that. We don't accept that. And they started doing research. They started getting second, third, fourth, fifth opinions. And pretty soon they discovered a doctor who was doing some trials of this very simple thing that helped your hip sockets form. And they sort of said, well, will you try this on our son? They did it. And I've been a runner most of my life until cancer struck. And I learned, and this narrative grew up with me as I grew up. They were like, you know, just don't trust the words of one doctor. You got to get lots of people's point of view. Don't take no for an answer. And you have to own your own healthcare. So this sort of being a proactive patient existed before I did. And it's sort of become sort of ingrained in part of my life. So I'm an entrepreneurial patient, and it's not entrepreneurial in terms of helping to form companies and build products and stuff like that. Yes, those things happen. It's an entrepreneurial patient in the sense of owning your own health and realizing that you have to create a path for your own personal health. Now, when I saw this picture, I laughed because one of the pictures used to promote this thing is, just check this out. I seem to have this thing, right? That sort of cracked me up as well. So, the things you discover about yourself. So I've learned along the way about 3 things that really matter. First, possibility thinking matters. In other words, there's another possibility for an alternative path for your health than you don't have to accept. And that you have to own your own personal health, as I mentioned, and that actually conventional wisdom can kill you, or at least hurt you. I have met other patients, or other people my age, who accepted conventional wisdom, and they are wheelchair bound, right? And that's a tragedy when we have the data and the knowledge to help people, but we don't have a way of sort of updating conventional wisdom to actually do that. So, second thing I want to just say is I'm alive and well. My team at Intel just moved back from a sort of satellite campus into an Intel main campus in Oregon, and somebody ran into me in this sort of shocked way, and they're like, "Oh, I thought you died." Which I'm like, that's a really strange thing to say to somebody, but hey, Intel's got all kinds, right? So I have been on a journey, and I haven't seen a lot of you. I know probably about a third of you in here, and I haven't seen you since I've had my kidney transplant, survived my 24-year adventure with cancer. So I'm back, I'm alive and well. It's the Monty Python sketch. I was fine, it was just a flesh wound, really. I'm happy to say I am running again. So some of you have been watching me give talks for years, and I started wearing little wireless pedometers before no one did, well over a decade ago. So this was my Fitbit yesterday morning and ran 4 miles in 32 minutes. So I never thought I would ever be able to run again. I never thought that I would be cancer-free again. I never thought that I would have a kidney donated to me from an Intel employee and be healthy again. And I'm learning what it's like to be healthy. But I'm also learning what are the elements that helped me survive all of these years against the conventional wisdom of healthcare. And I want us to build data systems and technologies that help that make the norm so that you don't have to be a patient advocate for yourself, so that the system itself sort of leads you to the right cure as we go forward. And that's part of what I mean by this paradigm of personal health. And I want to thank many of you in the room because you have been there for I've known a lot of you for 14 or 15 years since you've been working in this field, and a lot of you helped to get me through this. And then the third thing I want to say is, what's with that snarky title about ending long-term care? Some years ago, I showed to many of you in this room a slide where I just said, your business in long-term care can be disrupted. So I just pulled it back out there. I made up these combinations. What if Walmart and HCA and Siemens, combine forces to actually deliver aging services in a way better than you do? And these were all sort of fictional, Comcast and GE and Healthways, Microsoft, Mayo Clinic, and Disney. And I sort of gave you a lot of reasons why this might happen. And I can tell you now that these kinds of organizational mashups are happening. Many of you are involved in them. That's good. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people looking around the world, outside the US and inside the US, to try to figure out how to disrupt your business model. And you've got to be doing that yourself first, or somebody else certainly will. So I want us to give you that message today. And I still believe what I believed from the first time I started speaking at long-term care conferences 20 years ago, was that long-term care is still ahead of the rest of the healthcare continuum because you're the only part that really delivers whole life care, right? You've got to manage everything from meals and transportation to depression to disease to family squabbles and so forth. You're the only part that does whole person care, not just, what the particular disease is. You're the only part that does whole family care because you have a network of people coming in and out of your services sectors that you have to sort of deal with. And you're really the only part that knows how to deliver care in homes and communities, which is what the rest of healthcare is now trying to learn how to do. So I still think there's this advantage of saying, stop thinking of yourselves as long-term care. Think of yourselves as the community care industry. And perhaps start with older people because that's what you know best. But why stop there? If you build the infrastructure, you build the capabilities in terms of care models, business models, and technologies to support them to do that, then suddenly you're in a position to be a very different player within the whole healthcare continuum. So what's wrong with our current system, right? What's wrong with our conventional wisdom that we need to do something about? And I have to insert obligatory demographic slide because we all have them, but I chose one that a lot of people actually haven't seen before. So it's 2017 when we reached the crossover point, when the number of people over the age 65 exceeds the number of people under 5 for the first time in human history, and arguably will be that way for the rest of human civilization. This is an inflection point that we don't think about very much, but you start to understand global economics and the problems that are occurring around the world because of the loss of workforce, the loss of tax-paying workforce, and the increase of the number of people that need care. And this is going to have economic, this is just like not a little blip. This is sort of the new normal that we're just starting to come into. And we're just starting to figure out what that means as we go forward. So I have the obligatory economic slide as well, right? So here's healthcare costs in Western Europe. Certainly the US is the most crazy place in the world because we're at 3.3 trillion by 2015. Western Europe over 2 trillion. Asia Pacific 1.6 trillion and climbing quickly and will overtake the US and others in about 12 to 15 years after that. So, we know the sort of economic challenges and impacts that we actually face. And here's part of the problem with conventional wisdom. A lot of you have seen this slide before. It's still a very helpful one for me to sort of explain what I'm talking about. Here's our basic 3 steps of the conventional wisdom of care. And I would argue this is true in long-term care as much as it is in acute care and the whole care continuum. A little bit less so in long-term care, but there's still sort of an inciting problem that sort of launches people into the long-term care system. So step 1 is we wait until we're sick, and then we make a pilgrimage to a special place filled with expert technologies and experts to sort of put us back together again, right? And it was great in the 1780s when we invented this paradigm of mainframe care, right? That was a really innovative idea to put all this stuff into one place and sort of travel there, but it doesn't scale very well, especially when you start using those expert places for things that are, could be dealt with in a much cheaper and much more effective care paradigm than what we do today. And the second part of that conventional wisdom is once you get there, you trust a single miracle worker, some grand clinician, some grand care worker to repair the broken parts. And they're often doing this without much knowledge or data of you whatsoever. And they're really sort of focusing on the broken part, not the whole person. Right? This is our system of specialty that we have emerged over since the 1800s into the 1900s. It was largely driven by our discovery of the microscope, and we unpacked a whole healthcare paradigm based on, let's study all the parts in great detail, because it was the first time that we could actually see them. And we've done a really crappy job of reintegrating the whole person. And that's part of the care paradigm that we're trying to do. But again, I would argue those who have been in the long-term care services sector have a better way of seeing than the rest of the healthcare continuum. And then the third phase of that conventional wisdom is, once you've got the expert and high priest sort of telling you, I'm going to do some tests, I'm going to compare these tests against randomized clinical trials, and I'm going to make a guesstimate, though they don't tell you that's what it is, of what to do to you, right? This picture is actually from the 1940s. It was associated with one of the first published randomized clinical trial. Don't get me wrong, randomized clinical trials have been very important in our history. This was, key to making antibiotics from tuberculosis. This is one of the portable X-ray units taken around the communities to actually help them check for antibiotics. But we've come to a place where treating you based on the averages of large populations who may or may not be like you is, deadly and outdated. It's conventional wisdom that we have to change very quickly. I'm living testament to that based on this cancer that I've survived for the last 24 years and had a genome test where they discovered they'd been treating it wrong for 24 years, spending tens of millions of dollars and tons of suffering and almost killing me 3 times. And now genomic profiling is starting to say, holy cow, we understand things completely differently. We're just on the cusp of that level of personalization. So, the strategy that we've been using at Intel for well over a decade now, we call shift left. It basically imagine the quality of life on the vertical axis, the cost of care in the bottom of the day. None of us want to be in the intensive care unit, not a place that I just was coming out of my own surgery, and believe me, I was doing everything I could to get out of there. There's such a thing called ICU psychosis that starts to hit in after the first 2 or 3 days, right? Not a fun place. Incredibly expensive, lots of expert labor to help you in that environment. We want to be at home in the upper left-hand corner, independent, living a happy life, managing whatever chronic diseases we have. Hopefully if we have problems, just deal with them in a community clinic or in our own home or in our doctor's offices. So the cost per care per day is lower, the quality is presumably higher, and the level of provider skill needed to deliver whatever issues there are is much lower. We as a culture, as a society, have to shift left or stay left. And we have to figure out how to use technologies that achieve that. So when we choose projects at Intel to work on anywhere in the world, we run it through this filter and say, could the results of this investment help shift left or stay left for the care that the technology is actually supporting? So if you think about this, the model that we call is personal health, right? And it's getting beyond that sort of centralized place of care. So this is sort of conceptual model of moving from campus to community care in a distributed healthcare system. And the disruptive technologies that we're all using, mobile, social, analytics, on top of these global megatrends are starting to drive societies to do this. I've spent a lot of time with Scandinavian countries lately where they're literally closing hospital beds, closing facilities, and forcing themselves to do home and community-based care models because they said, if not, we'll just keep relying on these big mega infrastructures that we've actually built and we can't afford. So conceptually, you're not getting rid of a hospital completely, though I do think there will be a day that you will get rid of the big hospitals, and they will be very small and very specialized. And you're trying to take the capacity of care and distribute it out to the primary care office or to the person's home or to their car or to their workplace and lots of other places that you can imagine being on that map. That's conceptually and actually what we're trying to do, as I'll show you in an effort that we're doing in China. The other piece of this is distributed care, but also personalized care. So this is moving from that population paradigm I just talked about, where we understand you through the lens of a population and the averages of populations and treat you, to a personal paradigm. And here's a crowd of people, right? And yes, you may have a lot of things in common and so forth, but at the end of the day, I don't want to be really averaged together and have you make life-saving decisions based on the average of all those people. I want you to know a lot more about me. By the same token, you understanding a lot about the cells in a particular part of my body is important data, just like the population data is, but that's too extreme on the other direction, right? I'm a whole complex adaptive system, not just my cancer cells. I used to, when I had cancer, I don't think I've ever used that phrase before. When I had cancer a year ago, and for the previous 24, I felt like I should just put a picture of my tumors on my face because that's all anybody could sort of see me as, right? They weren't paying attention to the host of other chronic conditions I had and what was going on. I had to actually do that as we went forward. So the question is, how do we get down to care for the individual? And it's going to take a lot of different data to do that, right? We have a lot of these data types today sitting in different islands. But we're going to have new data types that are coming, tracking your behavioral data. The Fitbits and things that we're wearing are sort of just the beginning of that. And you'll see some of them in the booths around here. Certainly lab data, consumer-generated data, right? In the TED Talk that I did recently, I popped an ultrasound into a tablet and a smartphone and took a picture of my new kidney on stage and showed it to people, right? If you think that there's not going to be, Siri for helping you figure out how to actually take a quality ultrasound and send it to your doctor, I've got, news coming for you. And just think of the other diagnostics that are going to be moving out of those medical mainframes and into everyday lives and the amount of data that that's going to generate. It creates some real opportunities and it creates some real problems and hassles. So that's the kind of data sets that we're going to need to enable that. When you take all this together, we really have come to sort of 3 care platforms that we think are key for the future of personal health across the entire continuum of care. This is as true as it is for long-term care as it is for any other part of care. The first is care anywhere, right? We've already applied this. How do you develop remote, real-time diagnostics and care delivery? Not just collecting the data, but closing the loop with the person for patients and clinicians. Meaning, medical providers, I should say more broadly than clinicians, medical providers can deliver care from anywhere with trust and confidence, and those patients can receive care. Now, there's going to be limits to this, right? There's going to be times where you're going to have to go into an institution, but we want to limit those and only have you go there when that's the best, most effective quality place to do that. One of the quality metrics we're trying to put into about 50 countries, as everybody's starting to move to quality-based care, simply asks this question. Was the care delivered in the most useful, most effective, and most preferred setting that the patient would like? If we paid based on that, we would close down a lot of institutions. As we've looked at it at hospital-at-home models in Israel and France, at Johns Hopkins and elsewhere, about 60 to 70% of care that's done in the hospital can be done effectively and safely in home environments. Today, with what we have available today, we just have to unwind our thinking from this past that we're mired in, this conventional wisdom that has us locked into this kind of thinking. The second is care networking, and this is about moving to team-based care. Those 50 countries that we track policy efforts are, about 40 out of the 50 are moving, just like we are in the United States, towards a model of paying for team-based care and trying to move from the idea of the magic miracle worker solo practitioner knowing everything for themselves. It's not possible in an age with a zillion ICD-9 codes and more drugs that you could possibly know that no one human could ever keep in your head, right? And you need a multidisciplinary person for that. And a key part of this is training and tracking the quality of care that people do for themselves and for one another, and building tools that enlist them into the care team. right? We know we have workforces around the world of hundreds of millions of family care providers and neighbors, but we do nothing to train them. We do nothing to track the quality of care that they're giving. And some of them are good at it and should be, encouraged and trained and rewarded and helped, and some of them are horrible and just like kick them off the team, just like there are bad doctors and bad nurses that should be kicked off the team. So when we think about these things, moving to a team-based care model is important. And the third is this idea of customizing care. It's not just about genomics and customizing it for the biology, though that's the game changer that we're sitting upon, but also for their behavior and for their beliefs. Right? We've done studies with seniors where we've had medication reminders that they hated, and then we just personalized it to particular devices they were comfortable with, let them customize the voice that reminded them, and suddenly the same underlying technology they now loved. Right? So people's own behavioral styles and patterns and their relationship to their health, our tools have to customize for. And the last is for their beliefs. Right? I mean, I can tell you just from the patients that I've, well over 2,000 patients now. I was looking back at my journal, which I've kept since third grade. And I have helped over 2,000 cancer patients with patient advocacy, and I have tracked whether or not they were somebody that I thought was going to, it's subjective, right? Whether or not I thought they could believe that they were going to survive the cancer and the prognosis that were given to them or not. And I can tell you, belief matters. It's not everything, right? This is back to that sort of ethics or ethos of possibility thinking. So we have to think about these care platforms. One of the things that concerns me about healthcare providers around the world and long-term care providers around the world is they get excited about technology is we're still too focused on the technology. How would you deliver these care platforms? What would the experience be like of the workforce? What's the workforce that you would need? What's the flow of how this would get done? Start to conceptualize the business model about how money would change hands in this, and then say to the technology vendors and to us and to everybody else, what are the technology platforms that can fit our needs? And this is one of the problems that we've got right now. We're spending so much time on the technology and so little time on the business processes and the care model processes and the thinking through, in an out-of-the-box creative way, how to go do this. Which is why the work that we've been doing in China is particularly interesting, because they don't have a model to defend. So I'm going to spend a little rest of the time sort of giving you some examples of kinds of things that we're working on in China. And then I'll just sort of wrap up at the end with some thoughts about the implication for this community, literally for the AgeTech community who's here today. So if I often use the term grid, right? They're building out a grid in China, which is a set of national, regional, and local infrastructure, some of it that the consumers are buying themselves, some of it that's being put in place by the government, some of it's being put in place by sort of private players, and all of that stuff starting to connect up. And it's weird because you don't have control of the infrastructure anymore because some of it's not, a lot of it is not yours, right? But leveraging that sort of combined, converged infrastructure to deliver this kind of grid that allows care anywhere, care networking, care customization to go, not just for older people, but across the continuum of care. Now, here's the obligatory slide for China's demographics. And I'll tell you an interesting story. This relationship that we formed with the Chinese government started, must have been 6 or 7 years ago. I was at a healthcare conference in the US, and this gentleman, Asian gentleman, comes up to me. He's pretty old himself, and he sort of comes up, he's very quiet. And I can see these other people sort of following him in the distance, and he says, in words that I struggled to understand at first, we want to shift left. And I was like, what was that? He's like, we want to shift left. And I was like, okay. And, 5 minutes later, with lots of translation and help from the entourage who had come forward, this is the Minister of Health of China who has snuck over to a US conference on healthcare to learn what was going on. And they had sort of sought me out, right? And I was like, oh, I've never been to China, I still haven't been. My doctors would never let me fly there. They will now, but I haven't been yet. And so I didn't know decorum, protocol. I'm like, holy crap, right? So I just talked about shift left and the kinds of care paradigms that we were trying to do with examples from pilots that we were doing of these pieces. So this was the start of the relationship. There's been a new government and a new Minister of Health since then, and a new Minister of Civil Affairs, which is sort of the moral equivalent of kind of our Social Security and CMS administration, that we've sort of continued to work on this. And as we did this, right, one of the factors that we had to take into account is urbanization, right? It's not just global aging, but it's global urbanization. China is creating the equivalent of a 1 million person city every 2 weeks, right? They're building new cities the size of San Diego frequently from green fields that are just sitting there now as rural China moves to urban areas. So in the context of that urbanization, we started to work on an age-friendly cities initiative. And I can tell you one of the first things that we actually did with them, this is their goal, right? Their new 5-year plan is a national plan to drive age-friendly cities, both retrofitting old cities and building the right care infrastructure into new cities. And by 2020, their goal is to drive 90% of care for older people to the home. Now, I used to sort of yell at all you and say, hey, let's do 50% by 2020. They've upped it, right? They're going for 90%. I don't know whether they'll achieve it or not, and that's not the important thing. The important thing is that they put an audacious, stick in the sand and are then sort of setting policies and building infrastructure towards trying to achieve that. As we're starting to pilot some of these things in China, I wake up in a cold sweat at night because I'm like, oh my gosh, what if we're wrong, right? I mean, like they're going big on this. And they keep reminding me, it's not about being right or wrong. It's about being close enough and iterating, right? And this is one of the things about, it's like they're taking our own words on innovation and putting them back on us. It's like, if it's right or wrong and hit and miss, then you may as well go play, roulette and put all your money on one thing. You're building towards something and iterating and getting better over time. So we started this partnership with the Chinese government. I'll go into a little bit more detail here. And the first 2 years of this had nothing to do with technology at all. In fact, we're just starting to architect the end-to-end infrastructure for all of this. It had to do with very simple to postulate but difficult to solve questions. How many people will they have that are qualified to deliver care by 2020? And figuring that out is not and was not easy, right? And then the next step was, how many people need services? This is just within the sort of elder care. And it's like, you very quickly do the math, guessing, but it's pretty good, and say, there's no paradigm in which institution-centric, expert-driven care is going to work unless cloning suddenly works very well. Right? With all the most out-of-the-box thinking that we could do about how could you mint more geriatricians, mint more nurses, mint more doctors, not to mention sort of actually get standards of care practices in China, which largely don't exist, right, outside of the large urban centers. It was just like, okay, so this is by definition a community-based model. This is by definition a model that's going to have a lot of self and neighbor care, and we're going to start with that as the care model premise. It's not that there won't be doctors and nurses and geriatricians and experts on aging within the mix, but you're going to have to use those scarce resources incredibly selectively and well triaged. So we spent a lot of time on that, and then I didn't see this one coming. Again, I'm not a China expert. I'm sort of becoming a dangerous one, but we get to a point and they're like, we don't have a model to finance long-term care. Like, what's this 401k thing that you do? And so then we brought in experts, some of you, and many others from around the world, to just start talking about how are you going to finance this, right? At a conceptual level, not at this point, and before you get to a specific level. So now we've started to sort of lay out, they've started to lay out, and we're just one of many companies sort of working with us on this, but we find ourselves in the center of it with my little tiny China team because we have studied so many care models around the world and studied aging around the world, and just like nobody else has done this. So it's like, okay, all right, I'm still worried about what if we're wrong. And so now they have this agenda around age-friendly nation, bring quality of life, bring peace of mind, bring freedom. And they know that the whole world's not going to be the same. While there is mass urbanization and a lot of the models are going to be kind of an urban village model, there are still villages. There are nursing homes, and they have to sort of figure out how those actually sort of fit into the mix. A lot of it's going to be in the home and in the community. So what we've kind of done is walk through and said, let's build out the knowledge and the use cases for a lot of different settings, right? Let's go look at a sort of rural paradigm. Let's go look at a small city. In China, small cities are much larger than ours. Let's go look at a small city paradigm, a tier 1 large city paradigm. It's interesting, as we start looking at places like Beijing and Shanghai, they would talk to us about, we've let providers of technology and services build out infrastructure on the streets. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, like this street will have a whole bunch of services and built for that. And I'm like, why the heck would you do this per street? And they're like, well, there's 130,000 seniors on that street. It's like, oh, okay, got it. Didn't get the scale thing, now I got the scale thing, right? So even in the cities that have digital infrastructure, you've got these local ecosystems on streets going, which is not a sustainable model, right? People move, services close down, they're each sort of rolling their own technology, which is sort of what I see us doing as a long-term care industry, where it's sort of these pockets of everybody's doing their own thing, they want competitive differentiation from everybody else, and it's like, you and they need to very quickly figure out what's the shared infrastructure that you're all going to sort of put your shoulders into to enable and differentiate on care services and applications and other kinds of things. This is just one of my key messages today, right? And I cannot imagine a better part of the United States to do this than the Age West community that had come together. We're so excited to hear that California, Oregon, and the other players are sort of combining here, because I can imagine you building out a regional infrastructure for aging services that, again, would be a platform that could allow you to do a lot more than aging services in terms of where the puck is going for all care in general. So here's today. I'm going to show you. Oh, where's my wallet? Okay, I left it in my wallet is bulging not with money but with receipts from all my travel. So I took it out of my pocket, but I need a prop. So one of my team members from China just brought me this and said, "Oh, here's your coupon." So this, where is it? There it is, that's my parking ticket. I don't know about you, but I hope they detailed the car in that parking lot while we're here, because my gosh, that's like, you're charging how much for that? Sorry. The Marriott people are getting mad at me. So yeah, watch Marriott's stock go up, because we were all here today. So this is a coupon. What happens, even in a lot of the large urban centers, is that the seniors are given a coupon, it's like the entertainment coupon book, but it's not very entertaining. Here's a bunch of services that you can sort of access. It looks like sort of monopoly money, basically. And it's a paper-based economy, right? They'll go out to somebody and they'll exchange this for, some care, or they'll exchange this for laundry services, or they'll exchange this for sort of transportation. And it sort of works, right? Except for the fact that it's like, a lot of them only work on one street. There's no quality control of the service providers who are there, so there's a lot of fraud and abuse of the system. For the good providers, they have no data and no way to sort of do capacity planning, because it's whether somebody comes in and hands them a coupon or not. I mean, it's rife with a lot of problems as you sort of go through this. And if you think about it, their mental model of elder care is a benefit flow paradigm, right? It's just like, senior goes to service provider, service provider adds up all their tickets and sends this to the government. It's particularly unsustainable because you can't do endless government check writing. I mean, this is what they're worried about, right? They're worried about access for all of this older population, and they're worried about it bankrupting. They cannot continue down this path of just writing the checks that back up the per ticket things. So we're trying to get them to think about a care flow paradigm that says there is this care flow services network, and you've got service executors and service intermediaries, and the health system is connected to this as well. You've got service partners and service personnel who are all going into this infrastructure. The senior is going into that infrastructure. The children and relatives can come in and sort of help buy services for people and help mom make decisions about those services. And there's other benefit providers and so forth, and try to build this as an infrastructure that can become a self-sustaining business model, because of all the people who are doing services on it are paying to help fund the greater infrastructure for everybody. Helps with shared infrastructure costs. The providers can do capacity planning. It's one-touch convenience for the seniors and families. You got recommendation and trust services. All the things that sort of happen on the web, but in a controlled environment that's got a whole lot more sort of trust and security on it as you go through it. This is the kind of thing you're going to need for economic scale and sustainability. And this is not going to surprise you at all for those of you who are from the long-term care industry. There's sort of 4 platforms, or platforms of platforms, that they're trying to focus on for whole life care. Daily living services, housekeeping, food, grocery delivery, repair, laundry, the kinds of things that many of you do and deliver as services now for your individual organization. Health management and medical services, so the EHR for seniors, chronic disease management, home medical service, and all of that. Telehealth is a big, big part of what we're talking about coming into this same platform. So we're trying to not get them to do what we do in the US, where we separate out the sort of medical, infrastructure. Think about all the, health information exchanges and regional health information networks being built out in the US that are so hospital-centric and so clinic-centric in their thinking And it's very difficult for the ancillary, as we're often referred to in long-term care, getting a seat at the table and having those systems work for them. And it's primarily an information exchange, data exchange, and financial information first. It's not really a services infrastructure to allow a lot of people to be able to build capabilities on top of it. Social engagement platform, you've heard me give talks for years and all the work we've done at Intel on social health and how do you prop up social health. So the same platform allowing for all the kinds of things. I like that poodle there, I don't know what it's saying in Chinese, but there it is. And then services for safe and secure living, right? Environmental monitoring, certainly a key thing for China. Emergency services, helping, they call it anti-lost is the translation there, right? The people who are lost and so forth. You can imagine in these large urban environments, you've got 130,000 seniors on a particular street. You guys do the math and know the number of people that are likely to have dementia in those cases or mobility challenges and so forth. And the key is they're integrating and building, and we're building the use cases for this, realizing that they've got the rest of the smart grid too. It's not, the aging services grid is not a healthcare grid. It's a transportation, healthcare, services, and everything else grid. And this grid needs to be able to interact with all the others that are there. So it takes a coordinated set of actions to do this, right? So the Minister of Civil Affairs and their office we're building on a regional aging information network. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Think health information exchange, sort of, cloud-based architecture, and think, but much more for sort of services. We certainly have been helping China build out the regional health information networks for a long time, which was focused on electronic health record data and getting everybody digital. And they're building a network of community health centers to be those lightweight actual places that will sort of be in the communities. And then they're doing a bunch of, CNCA is sort of the moral equivalent of our NIH, sort of. And they're doing a bunch of research and pilots on, how do we do smart aging? How do we help seniors who aren't healthcare experts know how to do self-care? Those kinds of things go forward. Now, this would be hard to do nationally in the US, especially since we can't seem to make an insurance website work. But I'm sorry, hey, I'm a big Obamacare supporter. I worked on the damn law, so I can make fun of it, right? But you can see how difficult it would be to scale this nationally, an additional thing. It would be much easier to do this at a state level, or much easier to do this even at a city level or regional level to learn how to do it. So, I can imagine a scenario where, through this community, you could start to build momentum. Because I can tell you, I've been working in Oregon, we get a lot of credit, or attention, I wouldn't say credit, because of the sort of supposedly advanced reforms that we're actually doing in Oregon for dual eligibles. And I'll just sort of say, as we tried to help the state build out its infrastructure to figure out how we're going to deal with this huge cost problem with dual eligibles, they spent my most brilliant architects and people who have been studying aging around the world helping the different flavors of EPIC to communicate with one another for the first year and a half. And I'm like, you are in trouble. If all you're trying to do is just exchange financial data amongst the players in an ACO, and all you're trying to do is just have electronic record, which is a baseline, you've got to do that, but you're not starting to look at these models of how you can use online tools to help neighbors and disenfranchised people in the community give back and give services to others, and do that sort of skill shifting to other people. It's like, there's no way the state's going to sustain this. And I can guarantee you this is going to be true for California Medicaid, this is going to be true for Oregon Medicaid, this is going to be true for everybody down the list. And we're going to figure out how do we start to do these kinds of scalable infrastructure models that are very different in terms of the way that care should go. So that's where I want to go with some concluding thoughts. This is a diagram that I showed a bunch of you a long time ago. It was just talking about as health information exchanges in the US were sort of forming, and they were so medically centric, pushing to get long-term care's interests at the table. Right? Increasingly, long-term players are starting to be stitched into ACOs, and we're starting, mostly thanks to Leading Age and CAST and AgeTech and others, to at least start to have discussions like, hey, the data types that we need are different, right? You don't even have standards and codes and way of getting those data in there, but that infrastructure needs to work for us as much as it does for everybody else, right? So certainly we still need to look at the lessons learned from HIEs and regional health information networks before we go off in some effort to build a regional aging information services network. In China we call it RAIN, Regional Aging Information and now / Services Network. I guess we could insert an S in there somewhere. We need to be at the table for these build-outs here, understanding them. The payment reforms are going to end up driving this anyway. I don't have any doubt about this, right? It's like, ultimately, where we're going with payment reform is those of you who do long-term care, or those of you who do hospital care, are all going to become so immersed in these weird configurations of things that we're going to have the systems that allow us to exchange the data from the entire continuum of care much better than what we're currently planning for. And then we need to think about what this aging services exchange platform would be. And it would take government, private money to build this. You've just toured some of the most famous companies in the world who could very easily help you architect this kind of infrastructure. Start small with a region, or start small. California is like a big country unto itself, so we probably wouldn't want to do the whole state at first, right? But we ought to be thinking through, how you could build collective will. You have to get back into possibility thinking mode for this, because I'm sure we're all thinking budgets are tight, it's impossible, the economy hasn't grown yet, there aren't that many jobs. We cannot let all of those excuses continue to help us, think about what stake in the sand we want to put at, and slowly and iteratively start to get there for building out these kinds of service exchanges. These were slides that I did a while back on what are some of the common building blocks that you would need for personal health, right? It's care coordination tools where you can stitch these teams together from these different disciplines. It's telehealth, electronic care capabilities, which many of you are starting to incorporate into your models. Social networking, a virtual call center capability where you can put your own, residents to work helping other people who need it. We got to start thinking about not electronic health records, but lifelong personal health records, right? The kind of data and the longitudinal data that you need and collect on people is different than these acute-driven scenarios. Broadband in the community and so forth, right? That was an incomplete list. This is back to, you need to think about the strategic, before you think about the specific technologies, start with the care models that we want to do, and then come up with a building block approach that says these are the pieces that we would need in place to believe that we could deliver this, and then start finding technology providers who deliver to that. And then, the last piece of this is, what are the design principles that you're aiming for as you go forward? These are the ones that we use for personal health, again, across the continuum of care. I don't give any different messages, really, to hospitals that I meet with in China from long-term care providers. There's clearly a difference, right? I understand what the differences are, but in terms of the strategic message about what we all have to become, it's pretty similar. Place shift care to the home and community whenever possible, in the least restrictive, safest setting ever. I guarantee you what will move the needle on that, just like what's finally starting to move the needle on the US, is change the payment system. If you pay based on a quality metric that includes that, you'll start to see this change incredibly quickly. Skill shift many aspects of care to patients or residents themselves, caregivers and volunteers who are trained and tracked as a care team. I'm not saying, people are like, you're expecting people to do surgery on themselves, and there's people who are, psychologically can't be able to do this. It's like, I know this, right? Of course I know this. But there's probably 30 to 40% of the people on the planet who could be trained to do this, who want to do this, and are doing it today without any help and support, right? So, yes, because there's exceptions doesn't mean that we kill the whole norm and the whole rule. Invent new kinds of care workers. This is one of the things that we're doing in China now, right? It's like, okay, there's just people with jobs and skill sets that we don't have today, and what would those be to fill in the gaps of what you're trying to do, right? Is there literally somebody's job who is like, you take out the trash, you fix the mint caddy, and you do this, right? And that's what, I don't know, I'm making this up, right? But we're already sort of walking through. It's like, what would the curriculum be? What would be the workforce that you would actually need to do this? This is back to that, okay, you know how many people need care. You know how many people you think are going to be fully qualified to be able to do that. You got to invent some intermediary kinds of folks in there. And then prioritize the care models for prevention, early detection, and behavior change. We all know that. We've known it for 150 years. It's like now we have the tools to start to be able to do behavior change on both the provider side and the consumer side, because the tools are going to have intelligent data and flexible ways of bugging the heck out of people until they do the right thing. And yes, a bunch of people still won't change their behavior, but some of them will. Because most everybody who goes into this field in particular, and medicine in general, wants to do the right thing. Just look at the rollout of electronic health records with physicians who swore they would never do it, they don't need it, and so forth, and they start to discover that their colleague next door has better outcomes than they do. Most of them, once they get that data, are not going, screw you, I don't want any of this. They're going, holy cow, what do they do to keep their patients alive longer than I do, right? That paradigm is just starting, and as we build it out over time, we will get better at incorporating them into daily practice. And then finally, use the installed base of information community technologies around this. Governments at all levels are going to go build infrastructure for entertainment and communications. right? We don't have to have the health grid or the long-term care grid built, all by itself. It's about getting in there and defining the use cases and the services that those things need to support, and then what's the gap between what they're going to do for entertainment and communication that we would need for care service delivery. So, as you think about it, I put this, up here before. Skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. This is Wayne Gretzky, right? I mean, I use this quote in almost every talk because it's just so simply and profoundly true. If we continue to build a long-term care industry that's not moving to the personal health paradigm, while the rest of the care continuum is slowly moving there, then you'll lose your first mover advantage that you have, that most of you still don't understand that you have, because you are a not-for-profit or a for-profit that's struggling because your reimbursement rates are going down. You don't understand the strategic advantage you have of being able to see the care experience completely different than the rest of the acute setting, right? I mean, I know because I'm working with hospital chains who are thinking about taking over long-term care services as a way to extend their failing business, right? And you'll go to these meetings and it's like they don't even know what they don't know. I mean, it's humorous, right? And as I continue to work with long-term care people, I'm like, oh my God, you have this sort of gold mine of knowledge that you just don't even know how to, you don't know what a competitive advantage it is. So that's my sort of last thought on it, and I would just say, open it up to questions. I think it's about a community-based care capacity. I'm not saying ignore seniors, I'm saying rethink what you are. You're a community-based care industry, and you're going to focus on seniors as your first market. But I promise you, if you build this infrastructure to scale to them, you will find yourself with all kinds of options to move into other markets that you never considered. Thanks very much. I'll just ask more questions back. I'll shout it up. Come on, somebody's got something. Over here.
Thank you, Eric. I loved your speech. I think you have a great vision. Compliments for that. I'm Thijs from the Healthcare and Vision Transfer Foundation, and I'm very happy to be here because I lived for 42 years in the Netherlands and now for 1 year in the United States. And I have some good news for you guys. We have 30,000 iPads provided by caregivers to the seniors and indirectly paid for by government, and it really works. And you know why? It's because of the weekly bingo at 4 o'clock.
Killer apps matter, and bingo is a killer
app. That's
app.
exactly what I just wanted to add. So that is very promising. I'm not sure if you know Esther Dyson of Hiccup. I think Intel should hook up with her. She really wants to, you know her, that's great. So she really wants to try to create communities, and we all try to work in communities and create coalitions. I have 2 questions for you. One is, how are we going to make that work in this country? And 2, what is Intel going to do about it? How is Intel going to participate in that process?
Here,
well, in creating these communities and developing your promise.
The way that I'm going to do it here is I'm going to learn, it's a nice switch. We're going to learn on China's dime what works and doesn't work and take the parts that work and try to apply them here. I mean, I mean that with some degree of seriousness, right? I mean, how many times have I testified before Congress about, these kinds of things? And now in the climate that we've got here, to be honest with you, we're not focused here right now. We would focus at a state or a regional level if there were a group of players, but it's just not worth it, right? I mean, when the European Union is putting a plan in place to do age-friendly cities and investing in everything from the infrastructure and the R&D, and U.S. scholars are trying to go get grants overseas because they can't get anything here, it's like, as a U.S. citizen, it pisses me off. As somebody that needs these for my parents, it pisses me off, right? But I've sort of given up. I'm sort of hoping that they're actually going to do the White House Conference on Aging, which is required by law, and that we could then try to use that as a platform to try to stitch some of these things together here. But in the climate that we're in right now, I can't imagine it. And I'm a great possibility thinking person, but it's not there. I mean, I think the key is regions and local and so forth, and you're starting to see those things grow up. What worries me about all the local efforts, though, is they're doing it in a semi-competitive way, where they're like, it's like everybody's trying to be like, use technology as a competitive edge, right? And it's like, I don't think that's the way to think of it. It's like, use technology to build the care model that's the competitive edge, and build a lot of common infrastructure and technologies and standards on top of that. That's how markets go big quickly, right? That's how things go big. On the Intel side, at the end of the day, we are building computing, and the interest for us is driving the demand for computing on a sort of purely crass business level. We think if we can go build out these architectures and start to prove that they work, we'll scale them through organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, who have already come to us and said, oh my gosh, help us do this in other places. And like, oh my gosh, let us just get through, a couple of years of learning on this before we go try to do something somewhere else. And we all know that there are unique cultural, there are commonalities and there are unique cultural differences. So the last thing I would want to, these kinds of things that you just don't even know about, right, until you are there and on the ground. I think having the United Nations and the World Health Organization and others play a role where they're at least exposing everybody to what everybody else is doing. It's just because it's just a complete whack on the side of your head when you start to see what some of these other countries are doing. So, we're going down that path of trying to figure out how to scale these things through those kinds of organizations. Because, I don't think there's any scenario. I wouldn't. Well, that's not true. If I could convince Intel to give me $5 billion to go work on this, I would ask for it. But it's not, as a stockholder in the company, it's probably not the right thing for us to do. It's about building ecosystems. It's about building open ecosystems that others can innovate on top of and then iterating over time. And that's the approach that we're taking. Yeah, I'm not choosing. Scott, you choose.
So I'm a little puzzled and humored by the fact that you're talking about how terrible the for-profit or profit motivation is. Being an Intel person that is ferociously profit and competitively driven. Yep. And so it sort of seems inconsistent with the people that are feeding you. And I guess sort of going beyond that, I really struggle with your proposition that given the chance, people are going to behave in ways that are healthy and wholesome. We live in a country today where we see smoking rates actually going up in our young people, and we have more data than we've ever had to prove how terrible that is. And so it feels like there's sort of a disconnect there. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh my gosh, we've done so many pilots. I'm in behavioral sciences by training, right? And one of the things that just drives me freaking nuts, right? We can prove it time and time again. We just don't scale those things and put the incentive in places to maintain it. It's absolutely doable, and in enough of the population to move the needle. You have to look at cohorts and sub-cohorts, right? There are always people that you will never be able to change their behavior. Stop focusing on them, right? We can profile people who have adaptability and change ratios that are the best ones to target with these kinds of solutions, and there's an opportunity to do that. But I'm less worried about the behavior of them, and I'm more worried about the behavior of the care provisioning industry. And I can tell you, once you change the financial dynamics, behavior is changing. The amount of, we do ethnographic studies around the world, and we've just been watching these places in the United States change since Obamacare passed, and we started to move towards ACOs and other models, right? The behavior is changing. It's slow, it's going to take 10 years, it's hard to see because it's like the boiling frog kind of problem, right? But it is changing. So you do a combination of intelligent behavior chain platforms and a combination of economic incentives, and you'll start to move the needle on these things.
One more question here.
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you. Enjoyed the presentation as well. Thank you. What I'm trying to figure out is, as far as I can see, care at home is not covered by Medicare unless there's a hospital event, an episode. And that's only for, a few days, 30 days maybe. So how are we going to shift the model to getting the monolithic insurance companies to pay for home-based care when they won't even cover the elderly who are in great need?
Anybody in here in the Independence at Home pilots? Nobody? Wow. So we managed to get the Independence at Home pilots in for dual eligibles into Obamacare. And the pilots are small, but they're being done. And the results for that Medicare is seeing in the cost savings and the quality improvements and sort of happiness all around has been significant so far. And I'm going to DC in 3 weeks to meet with Congressman Wyden or Senator Wyden and Senator Markey and a whole host of others who are bipartisan to try to say, look, the pilots have shown the results, scale it, right? And so it's been a chicken and egg problem where we haven't had enough funding for the providers to do pilots that produce the data that then get Medicare to go do this. Having the CMS Innovation Center and others, which a lot of people critique, but just having a place to sort of engage with CMS where there are people from the outside, Silicon Valley and others, who know innovation process and so forth. I spent a bunch of time 2 years ago, before I got so sick I couldn't travel, teaching CMS how to do innovation methodologies, how we do it at Intel and elsewhere. And people were taking to it like a moth to a flame. There's a lot of career people who have been CMS forever, and they're asked to innovate, but no one's ever done sort of business change process to help them do that, or taught them innovation methodology to how to go do that. So after a while, I just decided the most disruptive thing we could do is stop fighting for reimbursement codes for innovative models and go teach them how to do business process change and innovation methodologies. And it's small, but it's actually starting to take hold. And I know of 7 different programs where they're starting to reimburse for in-home care. There's still crazy things. Russ Bodoffer, a friend from many of us, is the head of the National Home Infusion Association. And you would not believe the battle that we're having to do to get home infusion sort of reimbursed for, when we've got all the data that shows that it's safer, cheaper, better, and so forth. So I admit to you that those battles are still there, but it's starting to be there. And they're starting to ask what's going on in other countries. So we're going to get a lot more large data pilots out of China and the European Union because of what they're doing. And eventually we'll sort of shame them into it once Congress works again. I don't know how to solve that problem. All right, thanks everybody. Nice to talk to you again.
Wow, thanks, Eric. Eric is one of those people who has a unique ability to both provoke and inspire us at the same time. Really gave us a lot of content to digest, some legitimate, big, hairy, audacious goals, but he's a person that actually does those big, hairy, audacious goals. It's amazing to hear actually, implementing things on the ground and advocating in Congress to implement policy change. It's usually not possible for one person to be involved in all of those different parts of the chain. Thank you, Eric. Another round of applause for Eric Dishman.